Jezebel, the daughter of King Ethbaal of Sidon, came to Israel as a foreign princess, destined to become the wife of King Ahab. Her marriage was a strategic alliance, but it would bring spiritual ruin to Israel. A devoted worshiper of Baal, she brought her pagan gods with her, determined to make them the center of Israel's religious life. Her arrival marked the beginning of a dark period in Israel's history. Unbeknownst to many, her ambition would transform the nation, plunging it into chaos and idolatry. From the moment she entered the palace, Jezebel sought to assert her influence over Ahab and his kingdom. Using her beauty and cunning, she quickly manipulated Ahab into adopting her religious practices. The altars to Baal began to rise in Israel, and the faithful were horrified. Ahab, weak-willed, followed his wife's lead without resistance. Jezebel's control over her husband was absolute, and through him, she ruled the land. Her influence extended beyond the palace walls, infecting the very soul of the nation. Under Jezebel's reign, Israel became a nation steeped in idol worship. Baal and Asherah, the gods of her homeland, were venerated throughout the land. The worship of Yahweh, the one true God of Israel, was slowly being eroded. Temples to Baal were built, sacrifices were made, and the people were led astray. Jezebel did not merely tolerate pagan worship. She aggressively promoted it, coercing the people to abandon their faith. What had once been a nation devoted to Yahweh now fell into spiritual darkness. Determined to eliminate any opposition to her rule, Jezebel turned her wrath on Yahweh's prophets. She ordered their execution, seeking to silence those who dared to speak against her gods. Hundreds of prophets were killed, and those who survived fled into hiding. The land was filled with fear as Jezebel's soldiers hunted down anyone who refused to bow to Baal. Despite the terror she unleashed, a remnant of faithful prophets, including Elijah, remained. They continued to serve Yahweh, waiting for the moment of divine intervention. Elijah, a bold prophet of Yahweh, refused to be silenced by Jezebel's tyranny. He challenged her power by confronting the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. Before the eyes of Israel, Elijah called upon Yahweh to demonstrate his power. As fire fell from heaven, consuming the offering, it was clear to all that Yahweh was the true God. Jezebel's prophets of Baal were humiliated, and Elijah had them executed. Furious, Jezebel swore to kill Elijah, forcing him to flee for his life. But Yahweh had other plans for the wicked queen. Upon hearing of her prophet's slaughter, Jezebel was filled with rage. She sent a message to Elijah, vowing to make his fate the same as her fallen priests. Elijah, though a courageous prophet, knew the danger of crossing Jezebel and fled into the wilderness. There he sought refuge and divine guidance, questioning whether he could continue his mission. Jezebel's grip on the nation remained firm, but the seeds of her downfall had already been planted. The queen's unrelenting pride would soon lead her to ruin. Jezebel's thirst for power and wealth extended beyond religious matters. When Ahab coveted Naboth's vineyard, he sulked when Naboth refused to sell it to him. Jezebel, seeing an opportunity to display her ruthless cunning, devised a plan. She forged letters in Ahab's name, accusing Naboth of blasphemy. Her scheme succeeded, and Naboth was falsely convicted and stoned to death. With Naboth out of the way, Ahab took possession of the vineyard, oblivious to the prophetic storm brewing against his house. When Elijah learned of Jezebel's treachery regarding Naboth, Yahweh sent him to confront Ahab. The prophet declared a chilling prophecy. In the place where dogs lick the blood of Naboth, they will lick your blood. He also pronounced a judgment on Jezebel, foretelling that she would be devoured by dogs by the walls of Jezreel. This prophecy would haunt Jezebel, though she arrogantly dismissed it. She believed that her power was unshakable and that no one could challenge her reign of terror. After Elijah's prophecy, Ahab's fortunes took a dramatic turn for the worse. His reign was plagued by misfortunes, famine, wars, and internal unrest. The nation of Israel, already corrupted by idolatry, suffered greatly under his rule. The people began to lose faith in their king, recognizing the judgment of Yahweh on the house of Ahab. Jezebel, however, remained steadfast in her evil ways, convinced that she could defy the divine decrees spoken against her and her family. But Ahab's days were numbered. Ahab's death came as foretold. During a battle against the Arameans, Ahab was struck by a stray arrow. Despite his efforts to disguise himself, he could not escape his fate. He bled out in his chariot, and when his body was brought back to Samaria, dogs licked his blood from the ground, just as Elijah had prophesied. Jezebel, though widowed, continued to wield power through her sons. But with Ahab gone, her reign grew increasingly precarious, as enemies from within and without began to circle. After Ahab's death, Jezebel's sons, Ahaziah and Joram, took the throne in succession. Each tried to maintain the house of Ahab's dominance, but their rule was fraught with challenges. Jezebel, ever the strategist, sought to influence their decisions and keep the kingdom aligned with her pagan agenda. Yet their reigns were short-lived, as Yahweh's judgment continued to loom over their family. The once mighty house of Ahab was rapidly crumbling under the weight of its own sin and corruption. Jehu, a military commander, was chosen by Yahweh to carry out his judgment against the house of Ahab. Anointed by the prophet Elisha, Jehu embarked on a mission to cleanse Israel of Jezebel's influence. With divine mandate and fierce determination, Jehu set out to destroy every last remnant of Baal worship and bring justice to Jezebel. His reputation as a ruthless leader preceded him, and his approach filled the palace in Jezreel with fear. The long-awaited reckoning for Jezebel was near. When Jezebel heard that Jehu was approaching Jezreel, she did not flee or hide. Instead, she adorned herself in royal garb, painted her face, and positioned herself at a window. She intended to meet Jehu with defiance and disdain, believing that her position and power could still protect her. As Jehu entered the city, she taunted him, calling him a traitor, but her final act of arrogance would be her undoing. Jehu's resolve was unshakable, and he was determined to carry out Yahweh's will without mercy. Jehu, unfazed by Jezebel's defiance, looked up to the palace window and gave a simple command: "Throw her down." Her attendants, long oppressed by her cruelty, seized her and cast her from the window. Jezebel's body hit the ground with a sickening thud, her blood splattering the palace walls. Jehu's horses trampled her lifeless body as they entered the gates. The once powerful queen, who had terrorized Israel and defied Yahweh, was now a broken corpse, her reign brought to a brutal end. As Elijah had prophesied, Jezebel's body did not remain untouched. Her remains were left in the open, and dogs came to devour her flesh. By the time Jehu's men came to bury her, all that remained were her skull, hands, and feet. The prophecy was fulfilled in full, as Jezebel's once glorified body was reduced to nothing. The queen who had ruled with an iron fist, who believed herself invincible, met a fate more gruesome than she could have imagined. Her end was a sobering reminder of Yahweh's justice. With Jezebel dead, Jehu turned his attention to eradicating the influence of Baal in Israel. He led a systematic purge of the temples and priests dedicated to the false god. The altars that Jezebel had so proudly built were torn down, and the priests of Baal were executed. Jehu's actions were brutal but necessary to cleanse the nation of the idolatry that had taken root under Jezebel's rule. Israel, once a land of Yahweh, was now being restored to its rightful spiritual heritage. Jehu did not stop at Jezebel's death. He hunted down her descendants, ensuring that no member of her family would survive to reclaim the throne. Her sons, grandsons, and all who bore the blood of Ahab were executed. The house of Ahab was completely wiped out, fulfilling the prophecy of Elijah. With Jezebel's lineage destroyed, there was no chance for her legacy to endure. The once dominant dynasty that had ruled Israel with cruelty and idolatry was now nothing more than a distant memory. In the aftermath of Jezebel's death, Israel slowly began to recover from the spiritual devastation she had caused. The people who had once worshipped Baal under her influence returned to Yahweh. The prophets, who had been silenced during her reign, now spoke freely, guiding the nation back to its true faith. The destruction of Jezebel's house marked a turning point for Israel. Though the scars of her rule remained, the nation could now move forward, rebuilding its covenant with Yahweh.